Hi, Sharon. I,
Hi.
I feel a little bit almost starstruck because I've been quite an avid fan of your Tree Ladies Talk podcast for a while. I think I probably found you about a year ago, and um, I then had to sort of binge listen, if that's a thing, binge listen to catch up on some. So yeah, I was super excited to meet you when I met you at the NTOA conference a couple of weeks ago. Do you want to just say a little bit about yourself and yeah, what you do really?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, it's lovely to have met you, Sarah, at the National Tree Officers Conference, which was a really great event. And I admire all your posts on LinkedIn, and it's really informative, not just to the tree industry, of course, but to all of potential clients. So well done for what you're doing. So my name's Sharon Durden Hollenby, and I'm a independent tree consultant and arboricultural consultant. And I work mainly in the planning and construction industry, but I was a tree officer for 11 years. And I also have a role as president of the Institute of Chartered Foresters. And I'm on the British Standard Committee for Trees, Committee 213. And I also host a podcast, which, we'd love to do it every week, but at the moment we're just too busy. But that's been a real privilege to speak to so many wonderful people from so many different backgrounds and parts of the world. So I just thought it'd be fun for us to have a chat, really.
When I turned up at the NTOA conference the other day, someone behind me said, "Oh, you're the lady from YouTube," and I forget that all the stuff I put out there on social media, on LinkedIn and the YouTube channel, actually people are watching it
Yes.
and using it. And then when I was at the NTOA meeting a couple last week, actually, somebody there said they're using them quite a bit, and because I'm trying to answer commonly asked legal questions, they're just pinging them round to people, if they get that question, have a look at this. So
It's
yeah,
a fantastic resource for people because everybody's really busy. And sometimes I think we've got used to digital learning as opposed to going to a book. Although we do, the new Charles Miners and colleagues book is coming out very shortly.
yeah.
In fact, I think it's coming out imminently. But I think that idea of being able to go to a resource like your videos or a podcast on a related subject is a really fast way of learning, and you can sort of listen when you're doing something else, as
Mm,
well, it's great. It's one of the real positive things that have come out of the last few years and accelerated by the lockdowns, I think.
mm. Didn't they say podcasts are one of the fastest growing platforms or something during lockdown? I didn't listen to them at all before COVID, but I active listen, so I'll listen as I'm doing something else.
Yes, so will I. Yes, I mean I like to listen to all sorts, not obviously not just environmental ones, but yeah, well-being, and I think we've all got our own niche interests.
Yeah, no, exactly. So then with trees and planning, what are your sort of hot topics at the moment? What's sort of, I was going to say, coming across your desk, but I don't know, coming across. Do you have a desk, a virtual desk,
I
or
do
what?
have a desk, yes. So I deal with trees and construction and planning. So if somebody owns a piece of land and they wish to change the use of that land, maybe they wish to build properties or commercial, they will need to assess what are the impacts of that. So what is the land like at the moment? Looking at the ecology and all sorts of matters. And one of those, of course, is trees. So there needs to be a detailed assessment of what's growing there at the moment, how good is it, who can see it, and give it a categorisation. And there's a British standard for that called BS 5837, which is going to be reviewed, which is really interesting for the industry.
Mm,
So it needs that detailed assessment. So that initial survey should be carried out right at the beginning of the process. So that survey, along with other surveys such as ecology, will feed into a design team process. So it eventually ends up as a constraints plan, showing if we're going to develop the site, these are the things we must consider and must avoid. These are things that are real assets to the site. So having gone through that process, hopefully a development is sensitive to all of those constraints, and then the arboriculturalist will produce a particular type of report called an arboricultural impact assessment. And that's a standard framework for a report which looks at what have you got at the moment, what is proposed, what is the impact of what is proposed, and how are we going to look after the trees properly that we're going to keep. And also really start to evaluate what are the impacts, the true impacts of that development. So historically, we have just thought about 20 trees on site, 10 are staying, 10 are going, and we're going to plant 20 trees. So, oh, look, we've got another 10 trees being planted. So you say, oh, there's a net gain of 10 trees. But actually, that doesn't really mean a lot. You know, that's not good enough. So a group of us are really looking at the true impacts of development. Many people are coming at it from different ways, but essentially looking at other things. One is, what are those trees worth in terms of financial value? And there's a system called CAVAT, that's C-A-V-A-T. And you can find all about that, but you put a CAVAT tree valuation into an internet search. So that's one way of looking at what's staying, what's going, and what do we need to replace, how many trees. Another method is canopy cover. So looking down the bird's eye view at the shape of the crown and thinking, right, so these trees are staying, these trees are going, these trees are being planted. How many years will it take for those new trees which are planted to catch up with what's being lost? So we could get a sort of break-even year. So, and to do that, we need to understand how trees grow. And that is the subject of discussion. There are various methods, and it's also the subject of a big tree study by the Open University. But I'm looking forward to more standardization, perhaps, of this method. So another method, which is also massively exciting, is iTree. So looking at what we call ecosystem services that those trees provide. So by that we mean, what carbon are they storing? How much carbon are they sequestering out of the atmosphere? How much pollution mitigation are they absorbing? And what is the surface water runoff? So these are called ecosystem services. And again, these can be assessed, and this is work in progress, on a development site scale. So again, we're looking at a break-even year. So let's say in year 5, we've got equivalent canopy cover, because we're planting 40 trees, not just 10. We might look for year 5 for CAVAT value. But all of those metrics, such as CAVAT, canopy, and ecosystem services, they'll all have different sort of break-even years. But all of this sort of comes down to an excellent document that I encourage your readers to look up. And that's from Trees Design and Action Group, or known as TDAG. If you go onto TDAG website, they've got a whole suite of really helpful interactive documents. And one of them is on trees and planning. And that really sets a tone for, let's think deeper beyond just tree numbers. Let's also think about different metrics so we can really properly leave developments in a better place than they were in the beginning. So that's sort of what we do now, and this is how it's evolving. So it's becoming much more meaningful, and it's going to make a real difference on the ground. So
I was going to say, I think the value of trees is such a hot topic, isn't it? Like, I feel like you could debate it a lot. I know that last weekend, The Guardian talked about forest researchers report that they're produced in the value of trees in England. I'm based in Wales, so obviously I've got to be careful between that England and Wales distinction. And I was interested in that. So they were putting a financial value on the trees themselves, and then the financial value of the annual ecosystem services from those trees. I was interested to see that 50% of the value was the carbon capture and sequestration. And then the one that I was surprised at that came up in the sort of other top 5 list was the fact that they create a noise pollution screen. When I've been thinking about pollution, I've been thinking in terms of air pollution. I hadn't really thought in terms of noise pollution. So perhaps that's just a sort of a learning point for me. But every time I post anything about caveat value, tree valuations, and even about people receiving fines for illegally removing protected trees, it always creates a stir with people saying, how can you put a financial value on that?
Yeah.
And then that fine's not big enough. It's not, it's not punishing enough. So it seems like, I don't know whether it's because I'm involved in it, but it does seem like a really hot topic, and it is difficult to put a monetary value on those things that are, just difficult to value. I suppose things like ecosystem services, you value what you would have to pay to replace what you're taking out by removing the trees. What you'd have to pay to artificially remove pollution and flood attenuation and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is an emotive subject. And, everything can be hotly debated. There are other valuation systems, for example. And CAVAT was brought in as an asset management tool for local authorities. But there is a CAVAT committee who could answer this better than I can. But it is being used to value trees on development sites. So that it's a way of securing funding to get new planting. I mean, that's the objective, is to maintain the urban forest or even the rural forest. That's the bottom line. And we are dealing with things we're dealing with biology here, and we're dealing with human emotion about that biology. And those things are hard to sort of nail down, really. So there's always going to be debate about it, and it's always going to be evolving how we value trees. But we have to start with something. And I will say that whatever people's points of view are on any sort of metrics, by that I mean Canopy, CAVAT, or another system, or ecosystem services, it works. It works as somebody who works in private practice, talking to a design team and saying, actually, the real impact of what you're doing is really, really important. And so we must put forward a meaningful landscaping scheme and the first thing is, can we keep everything that we have? And sometimes it's just not practical.
Yeah.
So if you can't keep everything that you have, and maybe some of what you had is actually in a very poor condition, that's your first principle. Know what you have, keep what you can, and what you can't keep, replace so that it's a betterment. And then how do we measure betterment? We know that tree numbers, I mean, I go back to the late 80s in local government, where it's like, one tree in, one tree out, and that's not good enough. We haven't got time as a planet to wait.
Yeah, I read a lot of difference between how local authorities deal with the replacement of trees. Some might have a 3-2-1 policy, so replace with 3 if you're losing a big tree, 2 medium, 1 small. And then I think I was reading something relatively recently from the Bristol Tree Action Forum.
Yes.
Yeah, about their proposals as well. Go on.
I really like that. I mean, I read that recently as well, and I thought, how gloriously simple, in that you take the stem diameter of the tree that's being removed. So let's say a tree has a stem diameter, and I hope I've got this right, of 500 millimeters. It means you need 5 trees to replace it. An 800 millimeter tree, a really big tree, you need 8 trees to replace it. The fact is, it's simple, and it's probably very powerful. So these metrics are powerful. They are changing things.
I like one of the reasons. Yes, one of the reasons I set up Tree Law just over a year ago was because I couldn't really work with the contradiction any longer between how the traditional industry, the corporate legal world that I was living and working in, was dealing with claims involving damage with trees, and then the more important part of retaining trees and the climate crisis. They just felt so at odds with one another, and when I was speaking to the MTOA last week, I've done my tour of the OAs. I've done the NTOA, the LTOA, and the MTOA all in 2 weeks. Yeah, and you've got local authorities who are working with hugely limited budgets, trying to effectively manage their trees, trying to increase their they're targeted to increase their canopy cover, plant more trees, and yet they're facing concern over potential liability if, I don't know, one of their trees falls over in a storm. We're likely to be coming into stormy weather now in December, January, February, or if those trees cause subsidence damage, or really any other, or a tripping hazard, any other of those bits. It's a real not a double-edged sword, because a tree is not a sword, but you know what I mean. There's so many good things that you want to preserve, but they can be so inherently risky. I mean, the absolutely worst case scenario, a tree failing and it affecting a human life.
Exactly.
So it really is that difficult mix.
I mean, it's just, there's so many pressures on tree officers, and they need more support. In my opinion, they need more funding, and they need administration with support, actually, because the work that they do is complex. You've really encapsulated that, and we need more people going into industry to take those roles on, because we've got a skill shortage.
Yeah,
which is why I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing, because it might inspire somebody to come and do what is essentially a fantastic career working with trees.
Do you know what? Since I've started, I've had 2 conversations now with people who have reached out to me, who are arboriculturists or tree. They've got to they work with trees, and they're moving towards working in law, and they're really interested in that sort of tree law.
Yeah.
Combining those 2 skills together. I want to chat about how I got to where I am, etc. And I'm always very conscious about saying, if you're at the beginning of your legal career, don't presume that that's definitely what you're going to do, because who knows, something might come along and you realize that you absolutely love cyber or real estate or something else. But it's really interesting to see that there are at least 2 people out there that are starting that journey to become a tree lawyer.
That's fantastic. Well done.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So hopefully it is inspiring some people. But when you look at I've got the old book here, the Charles Myners book, and people say to me, is there enough law around trees to make a whole career out of it? Yes is the answer. I mean, it's absolutely vast. And these tree officers and all the different people involved with trees on the ground, you've got to have a working knowledge of all of this in your head, which is just crazy because it is so vast.
It really is. It really is. So well done for the work that you're doing. And everybody just keep listening to Sarah's tree law edits. So it's fantastic.
Well, I was very proud to say as well that at the MTOA event, I was talking Liz Nichols, so one of the ladies, barrister, who has written the updated version of Charles Myners' book. And there was another lady there also, actually from Birmingham Tree People. I've got the leaflet still here. There were 4 ladies that spoke, and it was the first time that actually there were more female speakers at an MTOA event than male speakers. And I'd sort of forgotten about the diversity bits, but in that respect, you're breaking the mold there as a senior female leader in these areas. Is that something that you think about, or is it something that is just your normal now?
I personally don't think about it, but I'm pleased that it might help some people think, oh yes, they can do that. I've just been me and gone around and done my thing, including being on a lot of time on building sites and actually having a very nice time, even if the trees aren't all that great. No, I don't think about that, but we definitely need more diversity in industry, diversity in its broadest sense, diversity of background and every single different aspect, because it has been traditionally white male, but it is getting better. But it's just getting that message out there to young people and career changers that this is a really interesting career. you needn't be out there getting your hands dirty if that's not your thing. You know, it's incredibly technical. It's very people focused. You're dealing with people's emotions, new technology. You're dealing with analytics, problem solving. There are so many different facets of being an arboriculturalist. I think it's a glorious mixture of science and art and almost sociology as well, and communication. So it's an enormously diverse career. So if anybody's watching this and they feel like I need a change, check out the Arboricultural Association's website on careers, and also the Institute of Chartered Foresters careers page. Both of those organisations give advice to people and work shadow somebody. So I do hope people will be inspired to work with trees, because boy, do we really need you right now.
I know I call him my tree friend, so Neil Davis from TR33 based in South Wales. I think he's newly appointed to the Institute of Chartered Foresters.
Arboricultural Association.
And he gave me a field trip day one day. He sent me a text saying, I'm going on a day doing some tree assessments. Do you want to come along for the day? And that was brilliant, just being able to get out with him and having a look at foraging for stuff off the sort of woodland floor. And he was showing me trees that he'd consider risky and what he looks for. And we were tapping the trees with a hammer, and it was brilliant.
Oh no, but that's great that you've had that experience. He's a great guy. He's really passionate about the industry and helping people as well.
He really is.
He was in an episode of Tree Lady Talks.
Yes, he was. Yeah, I listened to him. So what have you got any interesting guests coming up that you're excited about on your podcast?
Yes, I've got a couple of things. So actually, was involved loosely with the Victoria and Albert Museum in collaboration with the Silver Foundation, where they had a broad range of participants who really learned how to work with wood, and they created the most incredible thoughtful installations. And we've carried out a series of interviews with them, and that's going to be a YouTube and Tree Lady Talks documentary that's going to come out in the new year. And we're also interviewing one of our old favourites, Julian Forbes Laird, where he's going to talk about trees and planning, and it's going to be very interesting, and our listeners love a bit of controversy, so I'm looking forward to doing that. It's been such a privilege to speak to you, and thank you so much for reaching out and us having a chat together.